Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Pope John Paul II believes he is battling for the souls of America's Catholics. Can his austere moral vision triumph over America's wide-open culture? Joining us to sort through the conflict and the consensus are Michael Novak of the American Enterprise Institute and winner of the 1994 Templeton Prize in Religion, Father Richard McBrien, professor of theology at Notre Dame University and author of the award-winning book Catholicism, Paul Wilkes, author of Education of an Archbishop, and Helen Alvare of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. The topic before this house, the Pope and Modern Times, this week on Think Tank. Over the centuries, popes have commanded armies and controlled countries from the throne of St. Peter. Today, the pope's power lies in his pulpit and his pen. In 1935, the communist dictator Joseph Stalin was asked to placate the pope by allowing Catholicism in the Soviet Union. Stalin scornfully and famously replied, "How many divisions has the pope?" The communists ultimately found out the Pope has armies of the faithful, and he is doing a whole lot better than the communist system he helped overthrow. John Paul's latest book, Crossing the Threshold of Hope, has been an international bestseller. He has traveled more than any other pope, over 500,000 miles, and he attracts huge crowds of worshipers. But some critics say John Paul is too conservative. They claim the liberal reforms made by the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s are being rolled back. The Pope has ruled out consideration of women priests, married male priests, the use of artificial birth control, and abortion. Indeed, among Catholics in America, affection for the man has not translated into acceptance of all his teachings. 66% believe that Catholic priests should be allowed to marry. 59% believe women should be permitted to become priests. 88% believe it is possible to be a good Catholic and still use artificial birth control. 71% believe that abortion should not be illegal. And 89% of American Catholics believe it is possible to disagree with the Pope and still be a good Catholic. And yet, 74%, almost three-quarters of American Catholics approve of the way the Pope is handling his role as leader of the Church. So disagreement about his teachings, but approval of the man. What is behind this apparent paradox? First question, Father Richard McBrien. Is the Pope out of step with modern times, or is he shaping modern times?
He's out of step and he's shaping modern times. Now, I'm on here probably as a progressive Catholic, at least perceived that way.
But you are a priest.
I'm a priest, but I'm expected to say, yes, he's out of step on birth control, he's out of step ordination of women, maybe he's out of step on other issues related to sexuality and so forth. That isn't where he's really out of step in a really crucial way. Where he's really out of step, especially with American culture, is that he insists in his writings, his encyclicals, and his public utterances that we should not measure the worth of people by their net worth or by their power or by their status in society. He's got a strong conviction out of the depths of his own spirituality that what's important is not what we have, but who we are.
Paul Wilkes, are you from the progressive ranks as well, and do you think the Pope is out of step or shaping?
We'll take the fifth on the labels, Ben, but I think that, of course, he is the greatest moral leader and has the greatest pulpit of any human being on the face of the earth today. I mean, there are almost 1 billion Catholics out there, and if they don't believe in him, they still listen. I think that what he has perhaps failed to do is to look compassionately on us as human beings and frail human beings that we are. There's an attitude in the Vatican, and I was just there, about that man is basically, man and woman, excuse the expression, are basically evil, and we have to save them from that evilness. And I think that attitude of the Vatican is a thing that most of us find very distressing in these days.
All right. Thank you. Michael Novak, I know you are not from the progressive wing of the Catholic Church.
Well, I'm the kind of progressive who was a progressive when he was younger and then had teenage children.
Became the regressive.
A neoconservative is a progressive with 3 teenage children.
Right.
So sort of reality.
All right. What is your answer to this question?
Look, the Pope is out of step, but that's because he's a step ahead. He is thinking about the reunification of the Eastern Church of Constantinople and Moscow and the Roman Church to end 1,000 years of separation. He wants that to happen before this millennium is up. He wants to re-enter Catholicism into China, end the split between the patriotic church in China and the church. He is very concerned about Africa and Asia. He also is, I think, the prelate in Europe with the single greatest prelate's love for America, for its open institutions, for its sense of economy and of polity, with all its faults. That this more responds to the acting person. That's the book he wrote before he became Pope as a philosopher, a book on the acting person. So I think he's thinking the acting person. What's different about human beings from every other animal is we don't only behave from instinct. We can think new thoughts, imagine new possibilities, and choose to do them or not.
All right. Helen Alvare, is the Pope out of step?
Thank God he is out of step with modern times, because presently I think what you're seeing is a denigration of the dignity of individual human beings based on their status, based on their quality of life, to a very high degree. The Pope is calling people to the opposite of that, to the dignity of every person. On the other hand, he is the precursor, a herald of the times in the future that we want to see. That philosophy or theology succeeds that calls people to what they really want to be or what they hope they are in their best days, and that's what this Pope does for people.
But the members of his flock in America, as we saw from those numbers, do not agree with him on a number of these issues that have become sort of so controversial.
We could get into the niceties of some of the polling questions, because I've seen many that disagree with the ones you've put forward today. But to transcend that...
Polling figures disagreeing? I'm shocked.
Imagine that. Yes, every once in a while.
Right.
People wish to be people who, when they give themselves in marriage, give themselves once for all, give themselves sexually for the first time. People wish to be people who respect the dignity of every single human person. And he's calling them to things that, even though they aren't living it at the moment, and some of them may disagree at the moment, they have a feeling that what he's calling to them is a better place. And that's a theology of the future.
But you see, and I totally agree with what Helen has just said, but I want to make sure that when we talk about the dignity of the individual person, we're talking about people of color, we're talking about the immigrants, we're talking about the poor, we're talking about gays and lesbians who, my position is the same as the Catholic Church's on morality, but in terms of the way people perceive them, the way people talk about them, the way people deal with them in terms of legality and so forth. There is, I say the Pope is out of step, especially with American culture. But it's not just because of birth control and ordination of women. If the Pope would not be happy, frankly, with the contract with America. The Pope would not be a conservative Republican in this society. He talks in his encyclicals about the responsibility of government to those who are the least able to defend themselves. He talks about the concern. He talks about economic rights, which the former Secretary of the Treasury, Bill Simon, said don't exist.
Is that accurate about the Pope? Is it accurate about the Catholic Church? Or are they for markets, or are they for a sort of semi-socialistic collective?
This country is not for pure free markets and wasn't from the beginning. There's always had a vision of a proper role of government in the regulation of business and in other kinds of liberty besides economic liberty, political and civil liberties, moral and cultural liberties. I think this tripartite vision, if you want, is very much represented in the Pope's thinking. He would not be just a free marketeer. He's in favor of capitalism and he recommends it, provided that the political and civil liberties are also protected, law is respected, and then moral and religious life is respected. So it's a qualified view. I want to support Father McBrien on this point. The Pope is neither progressive nor conservative. He's pitching at a level of ideals that hold the feet of everybody to the fire.
I absolutely agree with that, that the reason this Pope is a prophet are for reasons that make far more people far less comfortable than merely, a single teaching on birth control. The wonderful thing about this papacy is that it makes everyone equally happy and everyone equally uncomfortable all at the same time. And I think to try and categorize it in American political terms misses the point. One of the points that I'd like to draw out of what Father McBrien said was with regard to the dignity of every human person across the board, and this Pope standing for that. One of the reasons the American culture is uncomfortable with this is because we don't have the moral framework to make a distinction, which the Pope makes, and Catholic teaching has always made, between the act and the actor. To love the actor up one side and down the other in a no matter what way, but to say no to certain acts and certain ideas. We're uncomfortable with that because the American idea of tolerance is yes to both all acts, all ideas, and all people. And that is not the Catholic notion.
I think the recent document that came down about divorced and remarried Catholics, if you're divorced and you do not have an annulment in the church, you're not supposed to remarry, and if you have not had this annulment, you are not to receive the sacraments, underlies the thinking that goes on with this Pope, is that we all have to march to this very regimented tune, and if you don't, you're really outside the church somehow. Now, here's the case. Here's a woman who has married a man, and he has been a drunkard and a lout, and she divorces him and marries another fellow who's a good guy. She is not supposed to go up to Holy Communion in our Catholic churches. Now, I'm thinking about Jesus, who started this whole business 2,000 years ago, at the Last Supper, saying, well, Mary Magdalene, look, we know how you earn your living. Well, John, you're not living with Susie, who you married 30 years ago. You stay out by the kind of the margins, and all you good Catholics, come in here and share this bread with me. I don't think so. I think the Catholic Church is about being inclusive and loving, compassionate and forgiving, and I think that this is not something that this Pope has really preached or promulgated. These documents come down from the Vatican. It is not that he writes every one of them, he does not, but it is an attitude, I call it an attitude of government, that we've got to keep people in line, we've got to protect them from themselves, and I don't think we need that. I just don't think we need it.
You may wonder, before Paul just spoke, you may wonder what the argument is all about, because here I was, and Michael agreeing with me, and Helen and so forth. The argument is, at Paul's point, it's what makes John Paul II such a controversial figure, even for Catholics, I should say, especially for Catholics, is not so much the values that he preaches and the work of evangelization that he so heroically and so powerfully and courageously preaches all over the globe and in the face of his physical disabilities and all that. It's how he manages the church internally, that it's a style. In other words, we can agree on the values, but at least in terms of perception, and I think no one, even my friends on the other side of the aisle here, couldn't say, at least in terms of perception, many perceive, as Paul just articulated, a certain hard line, a hardness in the way those values are actually enforced within the church. That's the tough part.
It's called tough love in secular circles.
Well, you can say that, Michael, but you can disagree on whether it is.
Well, yeah, there's room for a disagreement on it, and that's what we're doing.
Sure.
But I want to make sure the other side of the argument is heard,
of course,
because it's almost never heard in print. I think, of your view, Paul, that you just expressed, it's much too soft.
Much too
soft. I mean, it makes a mush of any distinctions. It's just sentimental compassion for everything. I think that has got this country in deep trouble. I think it's human beings in deep trouble. I think it's much better if there are rules, you keep a clean line on the rules. And you understand that human beings don't always live up to them. I think the Pope is very good at this. He has a tremendous reputation as a pastor. He wouldn't have the allegiance of so many people of Krakow and so on if he weren't. So I think he's as good at understanding the distinction that Helen made just a little while ago, the difference between human beings who are sinners, who don't live up to the ideal, and the sense of keeping the ideal clear and ending this sandbox Catholicism, which approves of everything.
Or the mush is exactly what we are. I believe that there should be rules and regulations. I believe in the Pope being is my guy. You know, I am a practicing Catholic. He is my guy, and I look to him for leadership. But then we enter into the human condition and realize that we are all less than perfect. And again, to deny, taking the most immediate example, to deny a person Christ's body and blood in the Holy Eucharist is too much to deny a person. Please.
There's a distinction, and you made it in an article that you wrote recently about the papacy in the New York Times, that I think is too firmly drawn between law and love. You mentioned that more law or more love was sort of the question about the next papacy. I think that is it's not a proper distinction. You can have both and in fact it's very much a Christian tradition to say, and beginning in the Old Testament, where it could be said in many ways to be the sum of it, that law is love. That how many times we thanked God for giving us God's law. And so what I'm thinking here is that twofold. Number one, it was the theme of Veritatis Splendor, and it's the theme of a lot that the Pope says. The Splendor of the Truth, the encyclical that was issued recently, that in being true to ourselves, being true to the truth, we are in some ways following what you call natural law, God's will for us, and that is authentic freedom. And the other aspect of this, it's maybe a practical point, but I guess I'm not someone who expects from the Pope in particular that he also has to draw out all the pastoral repercussions and possibilities from every teaching he gives. I understand in my life as a Catholic and in studying it generally, that is generally done on a local level. And so it is not his job to articulate every circumstance.
How much of the controversy about the Pope and modern Catholicism is hitched to the issue of abortion?
Very little. I'd say almost none, because abortion has a peculiar face on the American scene.
Yes.
Because of the whole interplay.
Let's limit it to
the Pope
America
is against abortion.
Yeah.
His predecessor Paul VI was against abortion. John Paul, every Pope's been against. No, it's not. It's not a distinctive feature of this Pope.
Abortion is not. The ordination of women is not. These are not things that are the pressing issues. The pressing issues, I think, are moral hunger. That we need. We want a strong leader. We want to live good lives. We want to look to somebody, but the element of compassion is not there. Him making a trip, God bless him, 20,000 miles, and helo dropping down into 4 million people, God bless him. But I don't think that's not compassion. People do not feel compassion coming from Rome about their life circumstances. These cardinals are walking around in their little soft leather shoes and the sumptuous Roman meals. I mean, here's a guy that's with his kids and his family, and we're trying to live out our lives.
I mean, but you're saying he's not compassionate, but you do not want to accept any specificity to that so-called lack of compassion. I mean, I say, does it involve abortion? Does it involve birth control? No, it doesn't involve any of those things. Well,
we didn't go to birth control. We didn't go to birth control. I think that is, it's not even an issue that's talked about, but I think it is a divisive issue because socially he's such a progressive about the poor and caring for them. And yet the thing that the poor in the third world absolutely need is birth control. But we won't draw that line because it has been the church teaching. This seamless line of church teaching has come to this day, and we're afraid to say, hey, maybe we didn't do the right thing.
There's something different about being a Christian and being a Catholic regarding sexuality, and that is what he's trying to teach. If you look at his little book on the subject, Love and Responsibility, it's a beautiful articulation of a certain vision, a distinctively Catholic vision of marriage. Marriage is a covenant between man and woman, mirrors the covenant between God and his people. The body is holy, and people are involved not just in the fun and pleasure that they get, not just in the reproductive rule, but in a sacrament involved in it. And he keeps trying to lift the vision of human beings to that specifically Christian dimension, and he thinks that if the world is absent that, the view of sexuality gets flattened out and terribly confused. I think he doesn't respect and doesn't like the American general view of sexuality.
Without in any way disparaging what's been discussed so far, sexuality is an extremely important dimension of human existence. And I'm glad that Michael, for example, gave a good argument for married priests. Because if married priests could have children, and once they became teenagers, they'd become neoconservatives, just like Michael. But see, because we can't, they're going to remain hopelessly progressive.
Yeah, right.
But listen, no, what I want to get off again is, and this is something that you would certainly identify with, Ben, as a man of great expertise in politics. Problem, try to imagine we have a new Speaker of the House in the U.S., Newt Gingrich, and you're trying to figure out what kind of a model of speakership he's going to follow. Is it the Joe Cannon kind of rule with the iron fist, or is it going to be laid back Tom Foley or whatever? part of the Pope's problem, a large part of the Pope's problem in the Catholic Church, with Catholics like myself, theologians and professionals, pastors and others, and many, many bishops, by the way, is the way he conceives the papal office. Without taking anything away from the moral values that he preaches and the good Christian faith that we share with him, there's a problem with the way he conceives the papal office. He has personalized the office far too much. He has exaggerated, really, the power of the papal office.
Michael, you have met with the Pope?
Yes, once briefly at dinner.
Is what Father McBrien says about his the personal aspect of him, this authoritarian sense, do you find that so?
I think
I didn't identify his personality. I said his conception of the papal office. He might be a very sweet man, but I'm talking about his conception of the papal office.
Let me say about both of those things. First, you'd find him a good Jewish uncle, very comfortable, very funny, very joking, very shrewd, very tough-minded person to sit with. It's just a great. He just makes you feel at home.
Remarkable.
Does he ever dine with non-conservatives, Michael?
Oh, yeah.
Can you get me a dinner invitation? I would love to dine with him.
Sure, he does. Lots of people. What I wanted to come to is, I think yes, he does have a view of a strong papacy, and I don't know what he thinks about it, but I think we had in Paul VI, for example, his predecessor but one, a Hamlet-like papacy that was not very decisive. And this man used that strength to bring down the Berlin Wall. That's one of the first things he said when he became Pope. He dedicated his whole pontificate to that, to bringing together the twin branches of Christianity in Europe. And he achieved that, and he achieved it by the strength and power of his preaching, of his teaching. He having been brought up under Marxism, he had the greatest possible arguments against their own theories about work, about labor, about the rest of it. And he took Marxism and turned it inside out, denying them even a theoretical justification of what they were doing. He's now starting to do that on the West. He's performing a kind of jiu-jitsu on liberal ideas and showing a much better foundation for them than John Locke, let's say.
What, as a panel, for the edification of our audience, would you agree and disagree about? And sooner or later, there is going to be another pope. Which way is the church going to choose to go? I mean, we have one vision of it and another vision of it, and we do have to keep it fairly brief. Let's just start with you, Helen, and go around the horn here.
I'd say we've agreed the Pope is a challenge to everyone, no matter what their political labels are, and I think we disagree about this distinction between law and love, that somehow they can't be brought together for the good of the human person, so that acting correctly for the truth, you can also find freedom.
We disagree about what's happening in American Catholicism. I think most of the magazines, most of the colleges, most of the schools, the whole establishment is very, quote, progressive. Such people have a kind of monolith of their own. The Pope breaks in on that and challenges it. I think they don't know how to deal with the arguments on the other side.
This Pope has appointed most of the people who will elect his successor in the Sistine Chapel some years from now. My sense is that they will not elect another one of him. I think many cardinals and bishops around the world feel infantilized by this Pope. He listens, but he doesn't hear when people are in Rome. We've had 1 million synods and not much has come out of them. And I think that who will be elected will be, maybe this is just wishful thinking, but more of a pastor and less of an accountant.
What we agree on are the basic values, which are both humane, natural law sort of things, and Catholic/Christian, that the Pope articulates and preaches and lives by. What we disagree on is the pastoral style that he uses to, oftentimes to enforce, if you will, these values, especially within the Catholic Church. And Paul is right. History shows, and especially the history of the last 2 centuries of papal elections, the next Pope will not be a clone of John Paul II.
Okay, we have to end it there. Thank you, Helen Alvare, Father Richard McBrien, Michael Novak, and Paul Wilkes. And thank you. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please continue to send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or we can be reached via email at thinktv@aol.com. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.